Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Ultimate Job Search and Career Podcast with yours truly, the company's expert, where we talk about everything related to hiring and employment. And today we're going to cover a couple of topics. First of all, we're going to explore the job interview question, what is your current salary? So if you've ever been in a job interview and they've asked you, what is your current salary? We're going to talk about that. What's the best answer? And what are the principles that are going on and they're going through the recruiter's head when they ask that question? We're also going to take a question from a viewer who wrote in, or a listener, I should say, who wrote in, and we're going to answer the question, why do companies exploit you? Why do organizations exploit you? We're going to get into that because I did a video recently on my main channel called The Biggest Con They Pull on Job Quitters. And I got a lot of responses from people on that, and they're all pretty favorable. And this is a question that came out of that. So all that and more today on the Ultimate Job Search and Career Podcast. So if you're listening in your car or you're just listening at home, or you're just having a lazy kind of day and you just put this on YouTube, kick back and let's get into it. Okay, so first topic for today. So you're in a job interview, and one of the questions that commonly comes up in a job interview, and this is one of the more controversial questions, is what is your current salary? Okay, this can be a pretty nerve-wracking question when people ask you this, especially if it's a very abrupt kind of pointed thing that they ask you. A lot of people get taken aback by this question. It feels very invasive. And there's a lot of different answers out there in internet land about how to answer this. Let's bring some clarity to this. Okay, so a couple of things. If you're in a job interview, one of the things on the recruiter's mind, or if you're dealing with a hiring manager, same thing. One of the things on the hiring manager's mind is what they should pay you. This is an obvious concern. And they want to make sure that your expectations align with what they're able and willing to pay you. Okay, if they don't, then that's pretty much a deal breaker. If the job pays minimum wage and you say you're expecting $1 million a year, well, obviously there's a mismatch there, and there's no real point in exploring your fit any further if you've made that clear and there's an obvious mismatch. It's kind of a deal breaker right there and then. So that's one of the reasons why they're asking this question. Okay, now, this is sort of an indirect question. The reason why they're asking, what is your current salary, is because they're using your current salary, or in the cases where you're not currently working, your previous salary, your most recent salary. They're going to use that as a benchmark to determine what your salary expectations are and what's a reasonable amount to pay you. Okay, so that's why they're asking this question. Now, this point is very important because people sometimes get confused when they're asked, what is your current salary? And this might be in conjunction with asking, what are your salary expectations? A lot of candidates, especially newer candidates, they kind of assume that, well, they're asking this because they want to try and come to some arrangement of what my compensation is going to be, right? That's why they're asking this question. The vast majority of the time, that's false. The only reason they're asking this question is, in fact, to see if there's a mismatch in what this job pays and what they guess you would be expecting based on your previous salary. And they're using the question purely to eliminate you. Okay, most job interview questions are basically to eliminate you, to make sure that, to see if this deal breaker or this show-stopping issue is indeed a showstopper. That's why they're asking this question. Now, what is your current salary? Now, this is, there's another dimension to this question, okay? And that is whether they're even allowed to ask it. And depending on what country you're in and what region you're in, that may not be allowed officially by law for them to ask you this question. In which case, if they do ask you, you're perfectly entitled to not give them the information they're looking for. But that doesn't really help you if they ask the question anyway. So we're going to get into this now. Right off the hop, a common answer to this question, this is one that I would kind of agree with, is to refuse to answer the question, to basically say in a polite way that that information that you're asking me about, my current salary or my previous salary, that's personal, it's confidential, it's private, and I choose not to disclose that. I don't believe I have to disclose that. Okay. If you're looking for a more cordial, more diplomatic way of phrasing that, you could say, well, I have this personal policy of not disclosing that information on the basis that it's personal and confidential and there's privacy issues. And I'm sure you understand. That would be a more diplomatic and cordial way of phrasing the answer rather than, no, I'm not going to tell you, right? So, but basically it comes down to the same thing. You can refuse to answer this question if you're not comfortable, because after all, it is personal and confidential information. When you think about it, there's no more private information really than how much money you make. That's kind of up there with some of the most personal and confidential information that a person has, really, that is not disclosed publicly. So that's what they're asking for. Now, why do they ask this? Well, they ask it because it works, because a lot of people end up answering. Now, not all of those people are comfortable answering, but they were not anticipating the question. They're put on the spot. They're nervous and they feel beholden to be forthcoming with answers. Okay, you, after all, want the job, and you've been fortunate enough for them to call you down for an interview. At least that's how it feels. So you feel obliged to answer their questions and be cooperative. And a lot of times, the interviewer that asks this question, they're counting on that, and it's that pressure from the nature of the social situation in the job interview that they're relying on to persuade you to answer this. Even if you really are not comfortable answering it, they're counting on that, okay, a lot of times. Especially if they ask you this question at a very early stage. You apply for a job, they email you back to say, come in for an interview here, and then you show up, and then within 10 minutes of the interview starting, they're already asking you questions like this. So how much do you make? Pretty direct, pretty personal information. There's no real opportunity to develop any kind of real rapport in this short amount of time, and already they're asking you this. So that's kind of the situation. Okay, so as I say, a common answer here is to refuse politely to answer the question. And like I said, the way I would phrase it if I was asked this question in an interview would be to say, well, actually, I have a personal policy of not disclosing that information because it's personal and confidential, and there may be privacy issues here. I'm sure you understand. And, you're friendly when you ask this question. You don't draw attention to how awkward it could be. You try and minimize that. And in a lot of situations, the interviewer will simply leave the question and move on to the next question. What you don't want to do with a lot of these questions is start babbling, start talking off the top of your head, because, if there's a gap in the conversation and you feel pressure to fill that gap with your talking, that can lead you to say all kinds of things. And that's usually, you're wandering into very dangerous territory. When you're just talking off the top of your head in a job interview, that can be quite risky, quite harmful. You risk saying things that, unbeknownst to you, actually just get you eliminated. Okay. Now, There's a few concepts going on behind this question. There's a few things that the reviewer's thinking. This is a strategically phrased question, and let's explore some of those. Okay, because this can further inform you of how the recruiter thinks and what they're looking for and why they're asking these questions and what they're hoping you'll say. Okay. The first thing you need to know about this question is that 99% of the time, the reason why they're asking this question is because they have no idea what you're worth. Okay, what an employee is worth, that's a pretty complicated question. And I have taught in HR programs before in universities, and one of the courses I have taught for many years is compensation. And when you get into compensation and how it's determined, especially in larger organizations, it's actually a very slippery topic. You know, the idea of how much of an employee's worth is quite complicated. And there's many ways of calculating it. Okay. For example, you could look at market pricing. You could look at the average price of an employee, the average salary or compensation of an employee in a given job, in a given region, with a certain amount of experience, with a certain amount of skill. Okay. So you can look that information up on the internet, and there's a lot of websites like Glassdoor and so on that will give you a ballpark figure of, you know, what the salary range is if you can enter in the job title, the location, years of experience. Sometimes they ask for the industry. You know, I mean, it's not pinpoint accurate usually, but it gives you a sort of ballpark idea of what the range might be. Okay. Now, all that's saying is that's not saying really what you're worth. That's saying what the average price is for a person with those skills in that place. Okay. Now some companies pay average price. That's called paying market price. Sometimes companies pay above market price as an HR policy. You tend to, all things being equal, you end up with better employees. And some companies intentionally pay below market, which means below market price. They pay less than most other companies pay, at least for some positions. You know, and you can have a combination. You can have a company that pays below market price for entry-level jobs and lower-level jobs, but then pays above market price for management jobs and executive jobs. So, I mean, it varies, right? Now, market price alone doesn't determine what you're worth. You know, you could look at an employee from the perspective of, okay, an employee is a collection of education and experience and skills and personality traits. And you could pay based on those. You have a point system where you pay per year of experience and, you know, per type of education, and, you know, you pay certain points for different skills. And, you know, I mean, you can do that, and then you convert the number of points to money at the end by a formula. You know, that's what some companies do. Alternatively, you could look at the value you've added to your previous employers. So if you're a salesperson or something and, you know, you only have 2 years experience as a salesperson, but in your last and only previous employment experience, you signed a $1 billion customer, you know, to the company, you know, a business to business customer. So, I mean, you could easily argue that you're worth more than, say, $50,000. I mean, the last company you worked for, you brought them a $1 billion a year customer. So, which would be value-based compensation. I mean, there's all kinds of ways of determining compensation, and they all contradict each other. So a lot of companies, what they do is they tend to look at several of these methodologies for how to pay someone, and then they kind of average them out, and then they come up with a sort of final answer, which is not really representative of anything. It's just their sort of guess as to what you might be worth or what they figure they will have to pay. And sometimes this is accurate, and sometimes this is completely out to lunch, you know? And the bottom line is that in the job interview, when they're asking you questions, they really have no idea how much you're worth. That's the bottom line. No idea what would be a reasonable amount to pay you. No idea what you're worth. They have an idea of what they were planning to pay for this position. They will have usually a salary range that's been approved and worked out in advance. And that range is known only to the hiring manager and possibly the recruiter. And they will not disclose that to you under any circumstances, usually. Some recruiters have rather strange ideas, and they sort of tell the candidate, well, we pay anywhere between $50,000 to $90,000. The problem with that is then it's like in poker where they show you their cards, right? Now, one of the priorities of recruiters, especially hiring managers to a degree, but especially recruiters, is that they are tasked with finding candidates that meet a list of requirements, but also they are generally rewarded, or at least thought highly of, if they can come back with a candidate that not only meets all those requirements, but doesn't demand a salary at the top of the range. You get more reward if you can come back and fill that position with an awesome candidate who has everything you're looking for, and they'll work cheap. That gets them top marks. And I mean, this should be intuitive behavior, because after all, when you go to the store and you want to buy, I think I was talking about this in a previous episode, you want to buy everybody's favorite soft drink, which is Diet Pepsi, and you want to buy a bottle of that. Now, all things being equal, first of all, your number one priority is to come home with a bottle of Diet Pepsi. But on top of that, you would prefer to come home with a bottle of Diet Pepsi that you haven't paid full price for. If you got a good deal on it, you went to a store where they were having a sale, or they were having a 2-for-1 offer or something, and you came back with a bottle of Diet Pepsi that was, you only paid 50% of what you were expecting to pay. That's even better, right? So this is how recruiters think. And this is explicitly outlined in their purview, basically. That's how that works. Okay, so they're looking for a candidate that not only has everything, but if you could get them for cheaper, all things being equal, that's good as far as they're concerned. Okay. Now, like I said, they're starting with this idea of they have no idea how you're worth. So one of the reasons why they're asking what's your current salary is they're going to make the assumption that whatever you were making in your previous job, that would be a reasonable amount of money to offer you in this job. And you might add a little bit to it, or you might subtract a little bit from it, depending on details. But that's the ballpark figure they're going to go off. And it's this assumption that you were paid what you were worth in your last position, right? Now, we could go into a philosophical debate on what you're worth. What does that actually mean? We'd be here forever. But the bottom line is they're not really looking to answer that question. They're looking to pay you not necessarily what you're worth, but a defendable amount. So if anybody questions the recruiter and says, well, how did you come up with that number? Show me that number is reasonable. They can say, well, hey, this person was paid that in their previous job. So it's not just my opinion. This is the opinion of this person's last employer. And the evidence is that the employee stayed in that position for several years, working for that amount of money. That signals that they feel they're worth that amount too. So for that reason, whatever they made in their last job, that's what they're worth. Give or take, a little bit. So that's their thinking on this. Okay. Now, we could also get into a very long discussion over whether that's accurate. But I think most people would agree that that's really not accurate. For example, if you had a college student who was in school and they were taking a 4-year degree or something, and they were working part-time while they were in school, and they were working at a sort of part-time job, casual job, maybe minimum wage, doesn't really pay that much, right? Well, they graduate, they get their 4-year degree, and they apply for their first career job. And they get to the job interview, and the recruiter asks them, what did you make in your last job? And the student or the former student is forced to say, well, I made minimum wage. Now, that's not accurate. That's not what they're worth currently. Now they have their 4-year degree. They're going into a job that's related to their 4-year degree. Obviously, they're not worth minimum wage. They're worth something above minimum wage. We still don't know what. Okay. Or someone who's changing careers. They're going from one industry to another industry. You know, maybe you had somebody that was a medical doctor, and after 10 years practicing medicine, they found it an extremely stressful job. They found that, you know what, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. It's too stressful. It's too demanding. And they change careers, and they work in a warehouse. They work as, you know, the sort of production planner for a large warehouse or something. You know, different career, using different skills, right? Now, obviously, if they were asked, like, how much did you make? What was your previous salary or your current salary? They're going to say, well, I was a medical doctor, so it's going to be very high, right? And that has no bearing on how much you're worth working as a production planner in a warehouse. So, I mean, there's all kinds of flaws with the thinking here, okay? You can try to apply logic to it, but really, at the end of the day, the recruiter doesn't know how much you're worth. They're asking this question to see if you'll hand them a value right on a plate, and so that they can accept that value as, well, that's what you're worth, and that's what you would be happy with. Okay, that's why they're asking this question. Now, the problem, of course, is that when you're asked this question as a candidate, you don't know what the range for the job is. So if the job, it pays anywhere between, say, $50,000 and $100,000, depending on how qualified the person is, you know, if you say your previous salary, is that too low? Is that too high? You know, you have no idea. Does that price you out of the range? Or, like, will it do you good to be honest with this question, or will it be very harmful? Will it eliminate you? And so you're really flying blind here. And this is another reason I recommend that people don't answer this question, because it's very risky to just fly blind. Just like talking off the top of your head in a job interview is bad, right? You know, I would rather have the recruiter guessing as to how much you're worth. And in the end, you convince the recruiter that whatever the job pays, like that range, that's what you're worth. You're worth somewhere in there. That's what I would prefer. Now, if you're applying for a job and you've sent in your application and your resume, and they reviewed it and they called you in for an interview, that signals that whatever you had on your resume and on the application pretty much covers their requirements. Otherwise, they wouldn't be talking to you. Okay, that's kind of the general rule. If they called you in for an interview, it appears that you are technically capable of doing the job. The purpose of the interview is to check on your people skills, your personal skills. Okay, can they work with you? Would they want to work with you? Are there any red flags about your appearance or your demeanor or your behavior or anything like that? You know, like, that's why they bring you in for an interview, to interact with you personally. It's to verify that aspect of your suitability, right? But technically, in terms of, do you have the skills? Do you have the requirements that they're looking for? The fact that you've been brought in for an interview, that suggests that you are technically qualified for the job. So if they liked you in the interview and it wasn't revealed that anything you had put on your resume or your application was false, and they liked you, you would move on. You would either get hired or you would move on to the last round of interviews. Okay, so the fact that you're at the interview, that means that you are qualified. They know you're qualified. And they're asking now to see if salary is going to be an issue. You want to leave them with the impression that salary is not going to be a problem. You don't necessarily need to have it all worked out now. You just want them to feel that compensation for you is not going to be a problem. So if you can keep them guessing, that's good. You don't want to say an answer and risk that eliminating you. Okay. So that's probably all I'm going to say about that. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Once again, my recommended answer is if they ask you, what is your current salary? Regardless of whether they are technically allowed to ask that question in your region, I recommend that you politely refuse to disclose the information, not in a confrontational way, not in an awkward way, but in a very polite, friendly way. You just say, well, I got a personal policy of not disclosing that. It's personal information, it's confidential, and there might be privacy issues. So, I'm sure you understand, and leave it at that. Okay, the bottom line is that an employer cannot verify your previous salary. Okay, they don't have access to that information. No one has access to that information. That information is between you, your employer, and the government. Okay, the government needs to know that so they know how much tax to charge you. Obviously, your previous employer needs to know that so they can pay you. But no one else is entitled to that information. No one else will automatically have access to that information unless you disclose it. Okay, so if you refuse to answer the question politely, they can't actually go behind your back and find out. Okay? I suppose the only way they technically could would be if they called up your boss and they said, how much does this employee make? And your previous boss revealed this information. Now, they're not supposed to do that. Okay, that's kind of an issue. You're revealing confidential information. I mean, depending on your country and region, there's consequences for doing that. So usually people are not going to do that. And in a lot of cases, it should be all cases, but a lot of cases, employers will know this. Okay, any HR person will know this. Someone can't call you up and say, you don't know me, but I need to know how much you're paying this employee. You don't release that. Everyone knows that. So that's the one. Now, it has been brought up that it's also technically possible for an employer to demand that you show them pay stub information. Now, once again, depending on your region, that may not be allowed, but in some places, there's not necessarily a law against it. In which case, once again, you can refuse. You can say, I'm sorry, that's personal, confidential, blah, blah, blah. I'm sure you understand. I don't reveal that. Now, they can always say, okay, well, fair enough, then I'm not going to hire you. Now, in that situation, first of all, there's a bunch of what ifs. There's a bunch of ifs to get to that point, right? The biggest one I would say is that if I was in that situation, I don't know if I'd want to work for that employer. I mean, you might be desperate for a job. That's a situation, but under any other situation, I don't know if necessarily working for someone that demanded that information would be good. They obviously don't trust you. And that's kind of a bad way to start off on a new job. They've already communicated they don't trust you. They think you're lying and they need to verify. So, I mean, right off the hop, I don't know. That's for each and every person to decide. But there you go. I mean, I think that's every sort of aspect of this question in a job interview. So if ever you get asked, what's your current salary? Hopefully you know the deal now. So there you go. Okay, moving on. Now, last week, I got a comment on one of my YouTube videos, and I'm going to read the comment. And I had done a video called The Biggest Con They Pull on Job Quitters. And I did a video, I was talking about how people who want to quit their job, it's stressful enough. But then what a lot of organizations do, a lot of companies do, is they pull a guilt trip on you. Okay, they make you feel bad. They make you feel like you're betraying them and all this kind of stuff. And that just adds to the entire stress of the situation. It's very unfortunate. Now, So somebody sent in a question. This is sent in by somebody called FI. That's all they say, FI. And FI says, "Hi, I'm a big fan. My question is, why do they do all these tricks? Are they psycho? Are they sane? Because no sane person would abuse an employee. Why do they do all the dirty policies and exploitation?" Well, that's a great question, FI. If you're listening, thank you very much for sending that in. Thanks to everybody who sends in questions and writes comments on my YouTube videos. If I can't answer briefly, like in a sentence or two, it's not really possible for me to write out a long answer. So I tend to try and save those questions for this podcast. So let's get into it. So why do they do these tricks? No sane person would abuse an employee. Why do they do all the dirty politics and exploitation? Well, listen, what I'm about to say, it's probably common knowledge to people who have had career jobs for many years, people who have moved around. They haven't just had one job or one employer for a lot of their professional life. But they've moved around a bit. They've seen some of the similarities between different employers, and they've seen some of the differences between different employers. You guys might know this, but a lot of people entering the workforce, getting your first career job, or you're in the first 5 years of your professional working life, you may not realize this, okay? And that is that a lot of organizations, especially big organizations, okay? And when I say organization, I'm talking mainly about companies, private companies, but you do get this in government, and you get it in nonprofits, and you get it in other things too, is a lot of them have an actual HR policy of indoctrination. Okay, and what I mean by this is that they try to exercise influence on the employees of the organization, especially lower level employees, to influence their attitude towards their employer. Okay. Now, a common way what this looks like in a lot of cases is you might be working in a bad company, a company that's exploiting you. It's for the amount of compensation you're getting, they're placing what most experts would consider to be unreasonable demands on you. Okay, either you're working under very harsh conditions, or you're, a victim of a very hostile working environment, or their demands on your time are unreasonable, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, they try and manage your attitude towards the company. They try and convince you that your employer is a great employer, and everything that they're asking you to do is reasonable. And it's industry standard. And wherever you go, any employer will ask this of you, or they'll try and influence you into believing that, well, this company pursues excellence. And for that reason, they ask a little bit more of their employees, but that's okay, because our employees that work at this organization, we're the best in the world. And this is why we're the best in the world, because, we go the extra mile, and we believe that no pain, no gain, and, blah, 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 all these empty platitudes. And all of that is expressly designed to keep you where you are, and to convince you that you should stay where you are, and to convince you that the way you're treated and the entire job is good and reasonable, when in fact it's not. It's not okay for them to treat you this way. It's not okay for them to demand this much of you and to have you work under these conditions. It's not okay, and it's not normal. There are some organizations out there that intentionally hire young people. And this is what I talked about in this aforementioned YouTube video. They intentionally hire young people who don't have a lot of experience working in their occupation or their profession, so they don't know what's reasonable. And the organization takes full advantage of this. They tell you, oh, this is perfectly normal. It's totally normal for you to work, say the day shift, but we demand that you come in once every week at 10 p.m. for a 2-hour meeting. Or vice versa. They put you on a night shift or an afternoon shift, but you have to come in 8 hours later for a 2-hour meeting. Oh, that's perfectly normal. And no, we don't pay any extra money for your time. That's reasonable too. That's normal. No one else does either. So this is actually a standard thing. Now the question from our good friend FI was, why do they do this? Okay. Well, it's simple. These techniques work. You get more productivity from your employees. It lowers the cost or minimizes labor cost. It also results in better employee retention and a host of other positive net effects like loyalty. So people don't want to leave. They don't want to spread confidential information, privileged information to the competitors, et cetera, right? These techniques work, unfortunately. And that's why in a lot of organizations, these can be either implicit, they're not actually written down and, it's common knowledge, but in some organizations they are. This is formal HR policy, like I've mentioned. It's a form of Stockholm syndrome, basically. It's like a corporate form of Stockholm syndrome to keep your employees indoctrinated, keep them loyal, and tell them that they are not exploited, and convince them of this. Now, how do you dispel feelings of being exploited, dispel feelings of, that your company is not that good? Well, you directly contradict those. So if you feel exploited, your company might be saying something to you. They might say explicitly, just so you know, your working conditions are absolutely normal across the industry. They might go out of their way to explicitly tell you things like that. The 180-degree polar opposite of what you suspect based on the evidence of your own eyes. Right? They may go out of their way to tell you this. Now, what I would say is that if a company goes out of its way to communicate these things to you, unprompted, usually that's a red flag. It's like when someone says, this is not a scam, right? They say that first. Usually when someone says, this is not a scam, usually what comes out of their mouth next is a scam. Don't take my word for this. As you go through life, take note of those situations and see if that's how it works out. Because I pretty much guarantee you in the vast, vast majority of cases, that holds up. Okay. And it's no different here. Okay. Now, for what it's worth, I've been an executive. I've been a CEO of a smaller company. I didn't do any of these policies. They're one of the reasons why I'm talking about it this openly like I am here is because I've always believed quite the opposite. I believe you build relationships with people. And I know that sounds like a total cliche when I say it, but in my line of work in industrial manufacturing and industrial services, that was kind of the thing that pays off. You can't really screw people over if you're in a small market and try to pull the wool over people's eyes. The word gets out, and if you're working in a smaller market, it gets out pretty quick. There isn't an inexhaustible supply of people in that business in your location. And once you've burned your bridges with pretty much everyone, all the players in your local industry, that's bad. Okay. So, if you're in it for the long haul and you're in a smaller market, and you're in certain lines of business like I was, industrial services, you just can't treat people like that. It's not suited to that type of industry. Even if it was, I would have an ethical issue doing it. I think a lot of people would. You don't have to take my word for that. This is not about me. But, I've been an employee in a lot of organizations before I got to that level. And I've been exploited. I've been treated like crap. I've had the wool pulled over my eyes by companies. I remember going to my boss in my first ever career job after being in that job for 2 years and saying, I really think that, myself and everyone, all of us that are in my position here, we should be paid more. Because I had done my research and they were paying almost literally double my salary across the street at a competitor, literally across, not literally across the street, but across town. Our main competitor was paying almost double the salary that my company was. And I was told, the official company line was, no, we've done our research and you're paid, in accordance with your ability. And so I said, okay. And then I handed in my resignation. And I wasn't the only one. Almost everyone in my group did that. And we all went to the same place. These things work. But I saw people that were indoctrinated, people that were highly talented, highly capable. They were being worked like dogs and they stayed. And they basically drank the Kool-Aid, And it's a form of exploitation. You're taking advantage of people's youth and innocence and inexperience, and you're lying through your teeth to them. They assume that their employer would be honest with them and tell them what's what. After all, you have a business relationship together. And unfortunately, that bubble is burst, in a big way. So that's why companies do this. The bottom line is it works, and it's a calculated thing. They know that you can't pull the wool over people's eyes for too long. Some people will realize this at some point. Some people sooner, some people later. Of those people, some will leave. Okay. And they realize this. However, based on their predictions and based on their experience, a lot of people will stay. They will drink the Kool-Aid, and you will be getting those people for less than what they're worth. You will be able to get more productivity out of them and reduce their labor cost. You will be able to get loyalty. You will be able to motivate them. And that makes up for the few people that will leave because they realize the truth. So in the end, these policies do work, as evidenced by the fact that more and more organizations are doing this. And that's the bottom line. So if you want to be a smart employee, in my opinion, my recommendation to everyone out there is if you suspect that you're being paid below market price, you're being paid below what you should be paid for your, for what you're giving, whether it's in terms of hours worked, whether it's in terms of demands made on you, lack of work-life balance, working under harsh conditions, whether that's physically harsh conditions, mentally harsh conditions. If you're working in a very tough environment, there's a lot of stress, there's bullying, there's a lot of issues like that. If your company is bending the rules, they're calling you in for extra time, but they're not paying you for the time. They're asking you to do the work of someone who's in a job who's a higher pay grade than yourself. And, this is happening repeatedly, and they won't acquiesce to your requests. If you've made a request, you say look, I've been doing this job normally pays a lot more. Would you be able to compensate me because I'm doing it so often? And they say no. If you see a lot of these red flags, okay, one red flag I don't think is worth necessarily quitting your job over, depending on your particular situation, but a series of these red flags. When there's smoke, there's fire. Okay. So in that case, I would say, look, do some basic research, find out what your company's competitors are paying, find out what other options you have for employment in your area, or your situation. It doesn't have to be in your area, but find out some of this stuff. It doesn't hurt to get informed, and then you can make a more informed decision about what you do, whether you stay or what your actions are. And you get other options. So if for whatever reason, you say you decide I'm going to ask for more compensation, and if I don't get it, you at least are aware of what your other options are. So that's what I would say to this. So I want to thank FI for sending in that question. I did a few videos about people who quit their job, people who are thinking of quitting their job. And I got quite a big response for that. So, if you have any questions about this or any other employment related topic, usually I talk about, how to answer job interview questions. But if you have any, questions about any similar topic, I love talking about business. On this particular podcast, I'm trying to confine it just to career and getting hired type issues. But if you have any question about anything business related, please send it my way. I'll be happy to explore it on the podcast. So I want to thank everybody for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to both my YouTube channels, The Company's Expert and The Company's Expert 2. And if you are interested, I have 2 courses. The first is called Getting Hired or Get Hired, where I tell you everything there is really to know that's relevant about getting hired. Okay. And not just the standard stuff. If you're in a slightly more complicated situation, like you're changing careers, or there's been big shifts in the economy or in your industry lately, and it has left you feeling unhireable or not in demand, or you've recently acquired education and it's changed your resume and recruiters are making assumptions and it's not going very smoothly. I walk everybody through that stuff in my Get Hired course. You can access it by following the link in the description. And I'm almost finished, but this is coming out very soon. My second course is called the $100 MBA. MBA is a Master of Business Administration. Nothing to do with basketball. And the $100 MBA, and what this is, it's a non-accredited MBA. It's not meant to be an MBA, but what it is I walk you through everything you would learn in a proper accredited Masters of Business Administration. I myself have an MBA. I've been an executive. I've been a CEO. I've advised many companies. I've worked as a consultant, and I walk you through the material. So if you are interested in learning the content, but aren't necessarily interested in paying thousands and thousands of dollars and taking 1 or 2 years of your life to get the piece of paper, I walk you through it. I take you through the textbooks that many universities use in their MBA program. So you can order the textbook off Amazon. You can read it at your convenience to the depth that's right for you and that fits your interest level. And you can learn the content. And I walk you through the whole thing. And I'm your guide. So if that's any interest to you, check out my $100 MBA course. The link shortly to be in the description. I will put it in the description of the videos when it's finished. So thank you very much for listening. You guys are awesome. Each and every one of you is awesome. If you currently feel exploited in your job, you're not alone. There are solutions for this. The best thing to do is start thinking for yourself, get educated, get informed, and the world is your oyster. You can make smart career moves that will improve your situation. So thank you very much. Take care, and I will see you on the next installment of the Ultimate Job and Career Podcast. Take care.